I'm Tim, the Brand Weaver, and this is Branding for Breweries, the podcast that helps you grow your brewery, build a better brand, and connect with more drinkers. Each week, I'm joined by the brightest minds in the beer world, sharing practical tips to help your brewery stand out and sell more beer. Let's get stuck in.
Woo! What up, 24-hour party people? 'Tis I, Tim the Brand Weaver, and how the gosh darn diddly-do are you today, my wonderful brewery-based folks? Are you well? Are you having a lovely time? Are you working hard? You should be, but you're loving it and enjoying it. And not only that, the dulcet tones of Tim the Brand Weaver is entering your ears and any other orifice that you might allow it right now, and I hope it feels good. Because today, I have brought the phenomenally named, one of the best names in the world, I believe, Tim Hickford, in for a chat with us. And Tim pulled me aside at BrFw&x a couple of weeks ago and said, Tim, I love the show, long-time listener, long-time fan, but you never chat to anyone about face-to-face marketing. And I went, Tim, you're completely right. And then Tim went on to say, well, why don't I come on and talk about it? Because, I don't mean to brag, but I may have done a couple of thousand brewery tours. I may have spoken to over 13,000 people about beer, and I might be able to share some pointers. So I said, Tim, why not, mate? Let's make it happen. So let's bring Tim into the chat, and he's going to help us to understand why face-to-face marketing through brewery tours and whatnot is so very important for breweries today, because we love to see people, we love to talk to people, we love to just be engaged by them. So that's enough of my waffle. Let's bring Tim in. Tim, how you doing, man?
Good morning, Tim. How are you?
I am super funky fresh, my man. The coffee has kicked in and I am ready to go as ever.
Fantastic. As am I.
Good stuff, buddy. So, Tim, you know the lay of the land, my man. Before we get stuck into this, would you care to indulge us all and tell us a little bit about yourself, your history, and what it is that you actually do?
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So, my name's Tim Hickford. I'm a home counties boy. I spent all my life around kind of Herts and Bucks, a little bit of Berkshire. I started pulling pints when I was 18. I moved into the brewery space when I was 21. I'm 36 now, so I've got 15 years into the beer game this side of the bar, and a few more before that on the other side. I've tried my hand at a lot of different things. I've fiddled with brewing a little bit. I've done various kind of roles in sales and marketing and ops and stuff like that. But a common thread of my kind of career for the last 10 years has been doing brewery tours, talks, tastings, activations in pubs, kind of getting out in front of people and talking about beer and the company I work for. Bulk of my experience was been with two companies. So I worked for a number of years for a company called Mad Squirrel. And then for the last 6 years nearly, I've been with Brew Point, who are based in Bedford. Brew Point is a really interesting business because we're sort of simultaneously quite a new brewery, but also quite part of an old business, which is Wells & Co., which used to be called Charles Wells, which some people might be aware. We've got 180 pubs that we own across England and France, and trying to engage with people and explain the story of where we got to and how we've got here, and all that stuff is kind of really the main bit of my job. So
the main bit. And dude, you're right to pull me up, because when I've had people on talking about marketing and sales and stuff before, a lot of it will tend to go quite digital, or when we talk about physical marketing, it's print pieces or point of sale. But the person-to-person piece is so very valuable. But in your mind, like, why does that really pack a punch beyond all the other different ways that a brewery can market itself? Why is face-to-face so powerful?
I would say that I think the face-to-face element, you kind of use that as a substitute for anything else. So you do obviously also have to be doing social media, you have to be doing print, all that kind of stuff. But face-to-face kind of works on different sort of metrics, really. So the first thing is that it's about depth rather than about reach. So I said to you when we talked at BrFw&x, I've probably spoken to around about 13 to 15,000 people in my time at just at Wells & Co. About our company and our beers and our story. You can do an Instagram post, and if a good Instagram post will hit 250,000 people. So the numbers are small in that comparison. But 250,000 people on Instagram, you might, if you're lucky, get their attention for 7 or 8 seconds. You know, I mean, most people who are doom scrolling, they look at something for 3 seconds if they're interested before they're gone. So when you say that let's just call it 15,000 people, and each one of them I've spent 90 minutes with, that's actually, in terms of engagement time, whilst numbers of people might not be as high, your time scope in that is like way deeper. And the sort of understanding that they get your business and what you're about and your proposition and your ethics and all that kind of stuff is far deeper when you do face-to-face marketing. I think the other thing to point out as well is that beer, because that's what we're all here for, isn't it? Beer is fundamentally a social thing. Beer is about, whilst you can drink at home and stuff, beer is best consumed out with people talking. It's a social lubricant. And so sort of being social in the analog sense as part of your marketing, of talking to someone, of interacting, of saying, where have you come from today? What do you normally drink? Well, this is what we do, and stuff like that. That's a huge, that's a huge part of it, is that the reason we all like a drink is because it helps communication. So that is important.
And I suppose it's that trust factor as well, isn't it? Like you rightly say, like if you've made that impression online, it's a fleeting couple of seconds at best, but to invest 60, 90 minutes of time with someone, you're building up a rapport, you're building up trust. And then by association, it's trust not only in yourself, Tim, but in the brand that you're associated with.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So you become far more connected in a way than ever before. But I suppose if you build up that trust, if you're spending that time with that person, the surface level value I can see is, well, of course, you've got someone who's going to be stopping by the brewery and picking up a couple more pints on that day, selling a few more packets of crisp or picking up a bite to eat because they're doing it after lunch. But I'm guessing there's much more that comes from getting someone on a brewery tour and doing it very well than just that, right?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It's you will sell more beer by doing brewery tours, but I think it's about building advocacy is really sort of like the aim of doing tastings and stuff, is that, on a brewery tour, we give a lot of information. We give information about how the beer's brewed, about the ingredients we use, the processes. We do a whole piece on the company history and how we got to where we are today. And the fact is that people aren't going to remember 95% of that because it's, it's just all sort of too much stuff. But if you can kind of stress the kind of key 5% of your information and make that land in a group of people, yeah, they're more likely to go and buy beer. But what they're also likely to do is go and tell someone, say, I had a great experience running, at this tasting or this tour or this event, and the beers were really good, and you should go and do it as well, or you should buy their beers, or you should stock the beers. So it's about advocacy. I was the SEBA Indie Beer Report came out yesterday. It's a new report they've done about the state of independent beer in the UK. And I was reading it, and this stat really jumped out at me, which is that 43% of drinkers would buy a beer if it was recommended by family or friends. And so, whilst in a tour kind of context, I might be recommending them beers. I might be saying, you would really like Foghorn, our hazy IPA. You would really like Genesis, our stout. What you're hoping for is that one of those things sort of lands with them, and then they go on and tell their friends, and say, oh, I did this great experience and I had this great beer. And those people, you essentially got a 1 in 2 chance that then they're going to engage with your brand off the back of their mate or their nan or someone doing the tour, So it's it has the potential when they land correctly that it can extrapolate, and it can, it can really help in that regards. So.
Yeah, it's that the domino effect, right? That
yeah.
It keeps on going if you do it correctly. And that's the thing that I've been on numerous brewery tours, and as you have, and some are phenomenal and some are not as phenomenal. And a lot of the time, a brewery tour might be led by a brewer, someone who loads an absolute metric F-ton about beer, but for some reason, it doesn't seem to land or connect. Like, where do you think, and what have you seen where breweries maybe fall a little bit flat in their tour experience where it just doesn't seem to resonate with the people going around, and it reduces that chance of the recommendation?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think this is where a lot of businesses, fall flat. I mean, I have also been on pretty, poor brewery tours at other places and stuff. I think a lot of it revolves around the person who's running it and them understanding what the purpose is and also who they're talking to. So there's sort of three things. So the person who's running it, okay, my feeling is that there are always exceptions, but on the whole, brewers are not the best people for running brewery tours. Okay, brewers are interested in producing a great liquid. They are interested in the making of it. The presenting of it is a different skill set. And generally, when I've done brewery tours that are hosted by brewers, there's two versions. There's either the one where they sort of they sort of murmur like this, and they're kind of talking like this, and they're all very fast, and they're looking at their feet, and then 10 minutes later you're in the bar, and you're kind of going, well, what was that about? Or there's the one where you've been listening to them for 45 minutes, and they're still talking about their water composition, and they've lost everyone in the room because they've gone so deep. Mm-hmm. And I think what you have to remember is that people are overwhelmingly going to be going to these sorts of things, going to tours, tastings, as a entertainment factor. It's their Saturday or it's their Friday night or something like that. And so what they want is they want information, but they want it in the context of being entertained, and they want enough information that they can feel like they're listening to an expert, but not so much information that they go, I don't really know what he's talking about. So generally I would be looking, look more to people that are obviously interested in beer within your team, maybe someone from more of a sales and marketing background who has enough information, but perhaps can see it as more of their remit in the sort of storytelling side of it. So
that sounds like a really tricky balance. And I suppose it's different courses for different horses, or vice versa, right? Yeah. How do you specifically strike the balance? Like when you've got people who clearly they're not looking for the water composition level of knowledge on their tour. What are the things that you're going, okay, this is a good level to keep them engaged, and they actually walk away going, I'm going to feel pretty cool because I can tell my mate about this in the pub.
Yeah. When we get to sort of the technical side of showing people around the brewery, I don't talk about anything they can't see. So, like we have a reverse osmosis plant where we filter the water and we adjust the water depending on what beer we're brewing. Don't talk about it. It's in another room over there. They can't see it. So if you start talking about that, it starts getting very abstract. So I just say, we have a borehole in the car park, which they can see, and the water gets pumped into the hot liquor tank, which they can see. If someone then asks about it later on, you can answer them. You're not withholding the information in the sense of, I don't want to talk about it. But the fact is, you might have one person out of every dozen brewery tours that wants to ask that question. And you can answer that one specific person rather than talking about it every single time and 99% of those people just being lost about what you're talking about. So that's that. And then in terms of, ingredients or processes, it's always linking it back to flavor. So I spend a lot of time talking about American hops, but I talk about American hops almost as a collective. You're likely to see tropical notes. You're likely to see fruity notes, citrusy, piney. I don't say, well, Simcoe is a really resinous hop, whereas, Idaho 7 is going to give you more of that sort of grapefruit, passion fruit thing. And Mosaic, if you use too much of it, can then taste like onion. Like, you've lost people. They don't know what Mosaic and this stuff is. So you say, well, British hops are going to be earthy. They're going to be, a little bit more kind of hedgerow fruit. American hops are going to be citrusy. And you link it back the whole time. Mm-hmm. And then when you get to doing tastings, you're saying it tastes like this. You're not saying like, notice how the acidity is a bit lower on this one, or notice how this one is, more, you might say more bitter, but you don't talk about IBUs or something like that. You kind of keep it very, this one is crisp, clean, refreshing. This one is fruity, tropical. This one is roasty, chocolatey, and everyone goes, I understand those words. So I know what he's talking about, and I can then taste that. So it's treading a line. You have to give people enough information that they understand how it's made and understand why you're making it that way, but not so much information that then they kind of go, this has turned into a brewer's lecture. You know? And the other thing I would say as well is that, you know, as people want to be entertained, so I always try and make it that I do not. I have a script that I follow. I wrote a script, and I sort of broadly follow this script. You do tweak it maybe depending on who you're. If you know you're doing it to a bunch of home brewers, you might go more techie. If you're doing it to a stag do, you're probably going to go a bit less techie. But I try and make sure that there is a degree of humor punctured into it. So it's not about it being a comedy show, but as an absolute minimum, you should be delivering 5 minutes of information to one laugh, basically.
There's a ratio. I love that.
The ratio, yeah. You know, because you see it if you do 10, 15 minutes of what could potentially feel like that you're berating them with information, you know, and they're kind of going, okay, you know, whereas if you give them a couple of minutes, 2, 3, 4 minutes, something like that, and then there's just a quip in there, it breaks it. It also gives you a pause. You can move on to the next thing. It sort of ends a topic, starts the next thing, something like that. So it's trying to find that balance. And actually, to be honest with you, it is a balance that I've found through trial and error. You know, I wasn't running brewery tours and tastings nearly as well, even 3 or 4 years ago, you know, as I am now. So it is important that it's just you learn by doing as much as possible.
Or listening to someone who's done it so many times, and you can just steal all his pointers. What's happening today.
Yeah, which is kind of the point of this, isn't it?
100%, mate. Share your golden knowledge, my man.
Yeah.
So we talked about obviously the process and the tasting side of things, and working in the bit of humor to keep it light and engaging. What about the bigger story of the brewery itself? Because we talk about advocacy and people getting on board with the brewery, not just the beers. How do you work that story of, like you say, Brew Point into it? Do you spend much time talking about the brewery itself, or is it very much just the brewing process and the liquid?
No, I mean, we cover at Brew Point, we cover quite a lot of everything really in the tour. We go through the whole brewing process to, you know, from raw materials through to packaging. We spend about 20 minutes on the company story, on the history side of it, which to our business is kind of quite crucial, because we've had this long history of actually 150 years now as a business, but also only 6 years in our sort of current format. So there's quite a lot of, you know, kind of talking through that. When we talk about the brewing process as much as possible, is trying to tie it into the brands and why things are done, you know, a certain way. And then we do a tasting as well, which is usually about kind of half hour or so, going through 6 beers, and then questions and stuff like that as well. So we try and cover everything in it. You know, I think your story is your biggest weapon. I listened to another podcast and someone said that 2 weeks ago, and I was like, I've got to hold that because that's a great line. I've got to hold that for Tim's podcast. But your story is your biggest weapon. You know, you can go and look around any brewery, whether it be producing, you know, 50 litres at a time or producing 50,000 litres at a time. Essentially, the bones of the process are the same. So, you know, whilst people, you know, a lot of people won't know that process and want to listen to you talk about it, if you just run through brewing as it is and that's it, you know, you're doing a very dry tour that really they could get that experience anywhere else. Mm-hmm. So it's trying to find that thing and, you know, we do it like this because we do it like this, or here's a piece of kit that we have that not everyone has, or, you know, even if you're doing a completely, you know, very standard version of brewing, you know, why have you made those decisions? If you're only a cask brewery, why are you only a cask brewery? If you're only a keg brewery, why are you only a keg brewery? You know, if you only sell within 50 miles of your business, why? If most of your beer is export, why? There's always a reasoning behind something. And even if you take the most, you know, archetype brewing, you know, microbrewery in this country, where it's run by a guy who probably had a successful career in IT, got made redundant in his 40s and has set up a brewery, you know, that's still a story. There's still a reasoning, there's still a logic, and finding that way to make that unique and then weaving that into the tour is the thing that's going to set it apart and the thing that's going to land.
Yo, I just want to take a second out of Branding for Breweries to make you aware of something. For those of you who don't know, outside of hosting Branding for Breweries, writing the book Branding for Breweries, I also provide independent breweries with hands-on support with their branding, design, and marketing. In fact, it's even better than that because it's not just me, it's a whole bunch of awesome independent brewery folks who are dedicated to doing the very best for each and every independent brewery. The team have worked with some incredible breweries like Northern Monk, Ossett, Brains, Pillars, all over the globe, and gaining results like doubling revenue, winning Rebrand of the Year, even gaining over 7 million views on the TikTok channel. So if you're looking to level up your brewery's branding and marketing this year, drop us a message over at www.thebrandweavercollective.com and a member of the team will get back to you and we can have a chat. Now, back to the show.
Does that make sense?
100%, and I'd love to hear you talk about it, dude, because ultimately, one, you said weaving, so you already, it's like you said the name of the film in the film. Does it extend to the stories of the beers as well? Like, do you go down the history of, I don't know, a porter and, of course, the names that you apply to each of the beers, or do you keep that quite high level?
We do. It depends. I mean, you can end up wading into a bit of a bog with that stuff. You know, my least favorite question that I sometimes get is when people say, well, what's the difference between a session IPA and an IPA, or what's the difference between a porter and a stout? My answer to when people say what's the difference between porter and stout, I say it's about 300 years, which is, you know, but you're in danger of entering into a 20-minute history class sort of thing. So, you know, but we do absolutely talk about, you know, why beers are named the way they're named, why we've chosen style A over style B. You know, I'll give you a great example is that we brew a really fantastic nitro stout called Genesis, which is 4.1%. And really the whole kind of logic behind brewing that is that stout in the last 25 years in this country has just been completely monopolized by one major company. We're based in Dublin, well, the brewery's in Dublin anyway. And we shouldn't have a monopoly situation. There should be local variety. So it's not about, you know, with that beer, it's not about saying you're better. It's not about saying that they're bad. You know, it's about saying we shouldn't have it where one beer is stocked in every pub in the country, and that's the sole example of that style in normal pubs. So, you know, I would definitely talk about that. Mm-hmm. So you give your reasoning. You give your, how does this fit into our business? How does this fit into our market? And that kind of stuff. If people want a bit of history, you know, I mean, if someone wants to know, you know, about difference between IPA and session IPA, I'm not saying I would refuse to answer them, but you're sort of, you know, you say there's quite a long answer. Maybe I'll tell you it when we've finished the main bit of the tour, you know, and the rest of the room are talking around, you know, amongst themselves. And perhaps at that point, everyone else in the room goes, no, I do want to hear it as well. And you go, okay, there's a consensus here. So I'll give you the 5 minutes on the history. But it's a lot of it is, you know, I ask people as we're going around, I'm going, is everyone keeping up? You know, is everyone understanding everything? Because the second that you lose someone, you've lost them. You know, their mind's wandering elsewhere. So it's very important that you kind of try and keep everyone on the same page and try and avoid these bits where you can go into a beer nerd death trap, which, you know, and you're talking to one guy who's as passionate as you are, and the rest of the room are sort of checked out.
And on that kind of like knowing the audience and working, keeping them coming along with you, one thing I'd be curious about is, and you've referenced it, like if you're taking a stag do around, I would hasten a heavy bet. The majority, all the stag do really wants to do is drink quite aggressively and get enough beer out of you. How do you bring them on side enough to like keep them like, enjoying the process before they hit the bar?
Yeah. I mean, a number one thing is you tell people when they're getting beers. That's the thing. So the very first thing that I do, well, we sign everyone in. We've got a sort of waiver. They sign, and while they're doing that, I ask them where they've come from and what they're there for that day. Or, you know, is it a birthday? Is it a stag do? Is it just something to do on a Saturday? So you've got an idea of who they are before you start. And then the very first thing is I basically say the tour's in two halves. We're going to go look around the place for about an hour, and then we're going to drink. And so straight away, everyone's going, okay, I get it. Like, I'm not listening to this going, well, where's the beer? You know, we come to a beer event, where's the beer? They're going, I understand, I'm going to listen for a bit, and then I'm going to do it. We do also here, you know, I always say to people when I'm signing in, I say, you know, there's no beer for a little bit as part of your ticket, but if you want to buy a pint and bring it with you, you can, you know, so buy a pint from the bar, bring it with you. A lot of people do, you know, a lot of people go, no, I will have one in, which I always like because it helps them relax into it and all that sort of stuff. But a lot of people go, no, I don't want it yet. You know, I'd rather concentrate, you know, and then we'll do that bit separate and go, okay, well, that's up to you. So when it comes to things like stag do's and stuff like that, you know, we up the jokes, we up the sort of, I try and up a bit of banter, you know, and sort of ingratiate yourself into that group a little bit. You know, I have a couple of points where so when we're talking about the hot side of the brewery, talking about the brew deck, you know, we get to the kettle, the copper, I call it a kettle. And I say, you know, I just pick someone out of the group and I say, you know, you look like a smart young man or young woman. What do you think we're going to do in a kettle? Have you got a guess for me? And they sort of, they mini brick themselves because you singled them out. And then they go, it's a kettle. So I guess you boil it. And then you go, yeah, well done. You know, you got it. And it's sort of little flares like that just kind of break it down, and holding in your mind the whole time that this is meant to be fun. This is meant to be fun. Beer is fun. You know,
so it is that interaction piece, isn't it? Because and as I reflect on some tours, it does feel very one way, where you're stood and someone's lecturing you, as you rightly mentioned, versus actually you want to feel like you're part of something, you're involved in it.
Yeah.
And so those little kind of, like I say, the question and answers or the bit of banter, yeah, it breaks down that wall.
Yeah.
So what about come the end of the tour? And we will talk about other things apart from tours, but I think it's such a really powerful piece. So tour's finished, they're at the bar.
Yeah.
Any little pointers where you kind of, is it a surefire thing that they're going to pick up some to come away with, that they're going to grab a few beers? Is there anything that you encourage after the tour to try and really make the most out of their visit?
Yeah, you can definitely incentivize further spend. So I mean, when they book onto it, our team who deal with the phones and stuff, they always ask, you know, did you want to book a table for a meal? Because we've got a restaurant here as well, before or after the tour. And if they order online, they're also prompted to do that. At the end of the tour, we give them a card that gives them one side's got a QR code on for TripAdvisor, so you're sort of prompting them to leave you a positive review. But also the other side of the card gives them 15% off anything to take away. So they're not going to get discount on pints or dinner, but if they want to buy cans, bottles, glassware, T-shirts, you know, limited edition beers or anything like that, they've got an incentive to buy it then, rather than to go home and go, I'll buy it on the website later, or I'll seek it out in a bottle shop. You go, you could buy this right now and you can save 15%. So we do that. I'm always quite keen to point out, you know, as I sort of wrap up the tour, they get a flight board of 6 different beers, but usually at Brew Point we might have, you know, between 15 and 18 beers available on the bar, which are kind of different beers that we brew on the main kit. Also some on this little pilot kit behind me, which does a couple hundred pints. So I'll always point them out and I'll say, you know, we've got this beer on the bar. We only made 4 kegs of it. So if you're going to stick around and have any more drinks, I thoroughly recommend you try that. You know, so you prompt it. You know, you also don't want it to feel like a sales pitch. I think that's the other thing. The other side of this is that you don't want it to be a lecture. It doesn't need to be a comedy show. Yeah, it might be too far. You know, but also you don't want it to feel entirely like a sales pitch. You're always sort of trying to strike this balance between everything and trying to work out, you know, how do we incentivize them to either spend more today or engage with the brand later on? How do you keep them having a good time? And how do you get them that hopefully at the end of it, they might understand who you are and what you do?
And do you spend much time, like outside of the allotted, say, 1 hour tour, will you then mingle in the bar, like from your scheduling side of things, do you give yourself another 30 minutes? Because
yeah, I mean, Yes and no for both. So we run the normal brewery tours that any man or woman can book onto. We run one on a Friday night, and then we run 3 on a Saturday. So the one on the Friday night and the last one on the Saturday, I absolutely do carve out essentially about another half hour of my time, where I then go and, mingle or ask questions or chit chat or anything like that. The first 2 on the Saturday, I have to be kind of aware that I've got another one coming up. So I try to, but that might be 10 minutes, but absolutely, when you get to things beyond just brewery tours and talk about tastings in pubs or those sorts of activations, I always build in time, that people can stick around and they can ask you more questions. And that's where you can drill down, because you will get that guy who comes up and he's a home brewer and he'll want to ask you about your hop bills and different beers and stuff. And I'm perfectly happy to do that. But I want to do it to the one guy who's interested, not the 30 people that most of them probably aren't that technically minded. So it's quite crucial. On the last tour on a Saturday, I always have a beer with them, because I can't have a beer on tour 1 and 2, because then tour 3 would get sloppy. But I think it's quite important that if you are selling something or propositioning something as being great, at least some of the people you're interacting see that sometimes you also consume it yourself, So it's just one beer, and it's just at the end, that's the last thing in my working week. But I generally feel like that goes down very well, that they see, this guy isn't like a paid actor or a paid stooge or something like that. Like, he actually also drinks the stuff he's talking about.
Yeah, you don't get that McDonald's CEO trying to eat a burger demo situation and not actually eat it.
Yeah.
Far more relatable. You touched on it there a minute ago, Tim, and this seems like the perfect time, because we spent a lot of this chat talking only about tours, but there are many other ways that you can get in front of people and do that face-to-face thing. You mentioned tastings at pubs, and we talked about quizzes and stuff before. What are the areas that you found most successful outside of a tour that gets that same level of response and engagement from people?
I think it's really crucial, because you do definitely see on tours that there is a mold of person who will probably opt to spend their Saturday going on a brewery tour, and that person, whilst they're all beer drinkers, that's not all the beer drinkers, so trying to find other ways to get out in front of them is really important. So we do offer our stockists that will come and run tasting evenings in their pubs. So usually that will involve they stock 2 beers on the bar, and we'll say, right, well, we'll include those 2 beers in that, but we'll also bring some cans or some bottles or some interesting stuff, or we've got a seasonal beer that on cask, maybe we can put that on, have 3 going for the night. A lot of the format of them will very much depend on the pub and what they're after. What I'm not the biggest fan of, which I have done in the past, is when you do these sort of meet the brewer evenings, but it's not structured, and they sort of go, well, you stand at the bar for the evening and try and talk to people when they're coming up about the beers and stuff, and they tend to fall quite flat, because people they want to talk to their friends. They don't necessarily want to be propositioned by some bloke at the bar about how great the beers are. So I tend to prefer a more sort of structured version, where I say, look, have you got a side room? Have you got a bookable space or something like that? Can we sell tickets in advance? And can we, do it that way, where you get someone for a couple of hours or something like that? So that's kind of one thing. You mentioned the quizzes as well. So I was having to think a couple of years ago about, again, how can we interact with people in the pubs? Perhaps people who drink, again, a lot of beer, but don't want to come and listen to a guy talk about beer. And so I came up with this concept, which was the Big Brew Point pub quiz. And this is something that we offer our stockists again. So what we say is, for one night, we'll come in and we'll run a pub quiz. And it's a normal pub quiz. It's general knowledge, it's sports, it's music, and all that kind of stuff. It's not questions about beer or about Brew Point. But as part of that, we will give out prizes. So we'll do rounds of drinks from the bar, but they're all Brew Point beers. We will do merchandise, but obviously it's all Brew Point merchandise. We have a couple of mini games that sort of tie into it. So we have a mini game we do in the middle where I've hidden a picture of me on the Brew Point website, and I say the first person to locate me on the website will win a round of drinks. And then in the middle of the tour, I take literally about 4 minutes to just do a very brief, like, who Brew Point is, what we do, sort of thing. The elevator, slightly extended elevator pitch kind of in the middle, but obviously constantly pointing back to the fact that these beers are always available in this pub or in this sports club or wherever you're doing it. And the customer base that you get on those is very different from what you get at a tour or a tasting. So you're hitting a new bit of the market. But people who are also still beer drinkers, so that's one thing that we do. But then, I think the thing is that what we don't want is you don't want a scenario where there's 1,800 breweries in the country and suddenly they're all offering pub quizzes, because it feels very cut and paste. So, on your broadcast, Tim, you always talk a lot about authenticity and stuff, and it's trying to find that thing that works for your business. We don't do what we have done, but we don't do a whole lot of like beer and food sort of pairing events and stuff like that. And I know that that's something that other breweries lean on quite hard and do a lot of those sorts of things, particularly if they have a lot of stockists who are restaurants. So, I know of another brewery that does blind date sort of things where they run a blind date activation in a pub, and they sort of focus it around their beer. So there's a million different ways that you can cut this cloth. But I think the fact is that if you can go to a stockist, if you can go to a stockist and you can say, you stock our beer, thank you very much. We want to support you with that. We want your customers to know who we are. And here's an event that we're going to charge you nothing to put on. We'll buy the beers off your bar that we give away. We don't expect the pub to even submit that. We'll give all the prizes, but what you have to do is you have to fill the room. You have to tell people this is going on, and we want a bum on every seat. But then you're going to get this evening for free. It's going to help you, and it's going to help us, and that's a huge value to them.
Oh yeah, it's the win-win in both camps, isn't it?
Yeah.
And one thing I was thinking about there is, we've talked a lot about like direct to drinker face-to-face engagement, but actually in the pub environment, then you've got the educational and training aspect of those behind the bar, right? Yeah. Do you get part in the staff training? Because again, I can imagine you're going to get some people who aren't overly clued up in the brewing process and things like that.
Absolutely, yeah.
How do you approach the staff training?
Yeah, I also kind of definitely kind of have a hand in that. As much as possible, we like to get people to the brewery, because if you can, it's always easier to sell someone the dream when they're standing in front of it, and it's always easier to get things to land on home turf a little bit, rather than playing away. But we do also do, sort of brand and service training in the bars. We do go in and, a lot of our branding, our visual identity around the lenses and the handles and that sort of stuff. If you can go out into a pub and you can say, well, you stock this beer, you stock Supernova or Helles Lager, and it's got this woman's head on it because she was the wife of the founder, and this thing ties into this, and this thing ties into this, and there's a whole story in there. And of course, what you're not expecting is that they're going to stand there and repeat that, to every customer that comes through, and give that sort of, because people just go, well, hold on a minute, I just wanted a pint. I don't need the,
need the 10-minute story to go with the pint. Cheers.
It's about them having that in their arsenal. So then if someone did say, well, what's this about? Or someone asks for a recommendation, they have that ability to do that. The whole thing is about building advocacy. The worst thing that you can do as a company is just, put all your effort into winning the listing. And then you win the listing and the beer goes on the bar and then it just sits there. And people go, what is it? I don't know what it is. Who brews it? I don't know. Are they local? Maybe, sort of thing. Like, if you're getting something into a bar, you have to build advocates in that space, and it's easy to do it with staff because the staff are paid to be that advocate and should, listen and are dealing with your product every day, they kind of become an extension of your brand. It is then also where you can try and build that advocacy with the consumer, because of the fact, like I went earlier, that 43% of people are going to buy something that's recommended by their friend. So if you can get it that the staff sell the first pint, then that guy or woman that's bought that pint is going to hopefully, in theory, if they have a great experience, sell loads more for you. So yeah, training is paramount. Trying to get people that are pouring the beer to understand it is the way to do it.
Fantastic, mate. Yeah, everything, it does boil down to a lot of it being face to face at the end of the day, doesn't it? And
Yeah.
I can see that 43% stat is really interesting, actually, just to see how much potential there is for growth if you do it right. Tim, if we bring this to a close now, mate, like I always like to ask, my guests, if you're talking to a brewer and they're like, yeah, I'm going to start, I can see the value in this face-to-face marketing, but I haven't really done tours or anything like that before. What's the thing that you suggest they look into and start getting set up maybe in the next month or so?
I think that to take a slight step back from that, it's very important that before you kind of embark on this, you make sure that your story is right and your proposition is right, and that you know what that is. If you are just running a brewery and it's kind of a bit aimless and you haven't thought about all the stuff that you deal with, Tim, around branding and stuff like that, this isn't he didn't ask for this plug, by the way.
Yeah, this is a non-endorsed plug for the service of the Brand Weaver.
But if you haven't got that stuff level, your tour's getting up base and you talking through the brewing process, and it's going to be very stale. So as long as you've got that story in place and you've got that understanding of why you do what you do, the best thing you can do is kind of just like start doing them. Get friends and family in first, get dry run, as much as possible, and kind of build a script, but also understand that the script is the base. The script it's not a TV show. You do not have to deliver word for word what the script is, but you build a bullet point plan of what you're going to say, the order you're going to talk about things. Think about your format. Where do the beers come in? I will always advocate that the majority of drinking should happen at the end of the tour, because the more people drink as you go through, the more their mind wanders and the harder it is to keep people on track. Don't worry so much about it being a revenue driver. There should, if you can charge someone, 15, 20 pounds for a tour and you're going to give them a couple of pints of beer, it should in theory be quite a profitable endeavor. But I think the thing is, as long as you're not losing money on it, think of it as marketing. Don't think of it as revenue. Think of it as marketing, and have that hat on. Think about who you're going to get to do it. I will say, to counteract my point earlier about not having brewers do it, if you are a very small brewery and you have that person who is the sort of founder, owner, head brewer all in one, they're obviously going to be the best person to talk about this. But even if you're getting to a business that's on your sort of 6, 8, 10 plus people, there's quite a good chance that person might not be the best person anymore, and there might be someone in sales and marketing. And so it's but the best thing you can do is just start, and you'll do a couple and they might be duds, but you know what, if you're just doing them to some friends or family, or if you've got like one local pub that are never going to fail you, they've been selling your beer for years, they're owned by your best friends like that, try with them. And what you'll find is that if you keep it light, you keep it entertaining, you keep it informative, but you don't get too technical, and you make sure that people are getting some beer, you shouldn't go too far wrong, you would hope.
I think sound advice: get the story locked in, get a foundational script, and then just get stuck in. Right?
Yeah. And if you're the person doing it and you go, you know what, I'm not loving this, get someone else to do it. Find someone else who's gonna take it on, because I've run probably, between tours, talks, tastings, quizzes, miscellaneous other activations, I've probably run 1,700 of these sorts of things, and I still get a huge buzz from them every single time. So it's fun. Beer's fun. You should be having fun talking to people about beer. That's great, you know. So if you're doing it and you're like, I hate doing these, it's probably showing. You know, you can probably, there's harder things to do than talk about good beer, you know, so you can probably find someone else who's going to do a better job than you if you really don't like doing it.
Mate, I think that's like a 101. You've got to be passionate about it. You've got to have that energy. You've got to show that you're doing it, because it's going to be infectious. Equally, if it's negative, it's going to be the bad perception. So find that positive person. Tim, this has been amazing, mate. I've really loved this chat. It's been so informative. Not that I operate or run a pub or a brewery, but yeah, I could see how putting one together would be really, really beneficial after listening to this, bud. How can people reach out, get in touch with you, pick your brains even more, or maybe even come and experience one of your tours?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would say, you know, if you're anywhere, even remotely close to Bedford, get over to Brew Point and come and do a tour here. As I said, we run them Fridays and Saturdays, but we do also take on private bookings as well. You know, more or less any day of the week, not Sundays generally, but apart from that, you'll get one. You know, in terms of picking my brains a bit more, LinkedIn is great. Just Tim Hickford. I'm on there. Also Instagram, Beer with Tim. Yeah, I'm always happy to talk to people about beer in general. Anything vaguely to do with beer, I'm always happy to chat. But obviously was very particularly happy to chat about anything Brew Point related as well. So
fantastic, mate. Tim, thank you, buddy. It's been a great chat. I really appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Thank you for having me on.
And everyone who's listened in, shared a comment, or indeed listening in the future, thank you so much to you. Yeah, you all rock. I'll see you next time. Rock on.
That's a wrap on this week's episode of Branding for Breweries. If you got something great from it, hit follow, like, and subscribe on your favorite streaming app. Or even better, leave a review, share it with your brewery pals, or get in touch, because I want to chat to you. Rock on!